This is Robots on the Road, Last Mile. This is probably where most people will interact with robots, right? At their front door, at their office, wherever. Like, this is true interaction with robots. So I want to go, you guys, what I like is that each of you has a different form factor. AutoX, you've got a self-driving car that's also a mini-mart. It's like a full sedan or a platform that can be adapted to different vehicles. And Ryan, Starship has little rover bots that cruise around George Mason and now Northern Arizona University and Milton Keynes. So I want you to start, Ryan, we'll start with you, but why did you choose the form factor you chose? Like little rover bots versus going full car?
Well, I wish I could say it was me. It was actually our founders who also founded Skype, started working on this project about 4.5 years ago. And when they looked at disrupting the last mile of delivery, they wanted to do it in a way that reduced congestion and was as environmentally friendly as possible. And when you think about what are the majority of the things that are delivered during that last mile, most of them are pretty small. So they would fit into this form factor.
Okay. And Hugo?
Yeah, for us, it was really about kind of looking at, we wanted to really build something that was scalable, that could, be used all across the country. So for North America, we think that the form factor is, larger vehicles that have been true and tested, and really primarily for a couple of reasons. One is the range. These are hybrid vehicles that can go as long as they need to go, and also the speed. So these are cars that can go 55 plus miles an hour, and so we think in the majority outside of kind of San Francisco and New York City and these sort of dense urban areas, the majority of the country is really, this form factor is more suitable for the majority of the country, longer distances. And higher speeds.
So I want to because we are a robotics crowd, let's get into a little bit of the nitty gritty, just a little bit. Can you spec out your robots for us? So how fast do they go? What's their range? How much can they carry? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, sure. So ours are just, right here in the U.S., it's Lincoln MKZs. So, these cars can go, whatever speed, really. I mean, we don't like to go, 80 miles an hour, but we can. In terms of capacity, it's right now I think about 16 cubic feet or so about 20, 30 grocery bags inside of it.
But are really, you partitioning off on the inside so that each delivery has its own locker, or is it one delivery per trunk?
Yeah, no, we have partitioned it off. So there's actually an access, the point of access outside of the car. You can put in your code, and then the certain compartment will open. But really, the way to kind of think about AutoX is more of an enabler. So, we have the Lincoln MKZ because, we've been testing on this model for the last, 2+ years. But, this can apply to any car. We were looking at, Chrysler Pacificas, anything that's obviously drive-by-wire. That's the key, and a couple other things like, automatic gear selector and so forth. But, really, our software we're a software company. We have hardware because we kind of have to have the hardware. Primarily we're a software company that can be applied to almost any vehicle as long as it's drive-by-wire and a couple other things. So.
Yeah, Ryan, one of the reasons I wanted to ask is because you had mentioned that when you were designing, or when the Starship Robot was being designed, you made it the width of like an average human shoulder, right? And or shoulders, I should say. And there was a lot of thought put into that, and because it's going to be mingling around people. So that's kind of what I was getting at, like the size and specs of it all.
Yeah, thanks for asking. This Starship Robot was designed with a few principles in mind from the beginning. Is number one, it would operate in the pedestrian environment, not in the roadways. So, right, it's not a vehicle, it's not a car. And if we're going to do this, we need to be really safe and compatible with people and share things like sidewalks and crosswalks. So we are designed about the width of a human, weigh 50 pounds. We limit speed to 4 miles an hour. So those of you who jog or run, that's a 15-minute mile, which isn't quite running, but it's exercise, I suppose. And our robots can hold 2 to 3 very full shopping bags of groceries. They also have non-food applications, but in the sense of food, it's top-up shopping, it's plenty of food for your family or a group of office workers or classmates as well.
So you're at different stages of implementation. You're running pilots here in the Bay Area with AutoX. You're on a couple of different campuses, corporate and academic. What is sort of the curve of human interaction, right? So is it people treat it as a novelty first, or like, oh, look at this, it's cute, it's a robot, and like, oh, I can order from it, and then do they get to the point where it's mundane, or is it always, where are you at in those kinds of things?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. When we designed the robot, we knew it needed to not only be safe, but appear safe. Usually when I take it somewhere, it's cute. When we take it to college campuses, people compare it to Puppy Day. But the reality is very quickly it just becomes part of the environment and people take it for granted. So, most people give it no attention whatsoever as it passes by.
Hugo?
Yeah, so we launched, I think, California's first, public on-road delivery, autonomous delivery service in September of last year. And it was basically to a couple of zip codes around our office. And people could download the app. And they would we would partner with a couple of grocery stores and restaurants. Now we have about 30 or 40 restaurants on our app, and of course there was a portion of the population that was saying this is cool, this is there's a novelty factor here, but very quickly we learned that everyone in these couple zip codes really liked the service, and in fact we had a couple of folks, elderly folks, come to us and say, hey, when is this going to be rolled out, all over? Because, we want to have stuff delivered like medicine, like warm food at 3 a.m. and we're too old to drive. And so, in fact, it was very well received by sort of the millennial folks who obviously, like the novelty factor, but also the sort of upper end of the age spectrum with older people as well. So, yeah, it was great.
I want to ask about implementation with your customers. So not the end customer, but the people who are employing your robots, right? What is sort of the logistics of it? Is there, if someone were to get a fleet of robots or if someone were to get an autonomous vehicle, do they have to create a space for them, a recharging infrastructure? Do they have a dispatch system? Like, what are sort of the nuts and bolts that somebody here might go like, oh, I'd be interested in using Starship Robots or AutoX. What kinds of things should they know before they approach you about just what you physically need to have in order to start a program like this?
Mm-hmm. Well, for Starship, we are operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week across 4 countries. Our primary food applications are in the United Kingdom and in the United States. We operate our fleet as a service. However, that service is the care and maintenance of the technology. So, for instance, in the United Kingdom, where we're delivering, hundreds of deliveries a day, thousands per week, in cooperation with different grocery stores, the co-op workers will pick, pack, and load the robots with those groceries, and that robot will be unloaded by the end consumer. In the United States, where we're more focused on prepared food delivery, same thing. The restaurant workers are trained to simply load the robots, and those robots are then unlocked and unloaded by the end consumers. Okay,
but do they need to have like a bay of, a room filled with 20 outlets, or like you know what I mean? Just
I do know what you mean, and I guess it varies a little bit. In the university campus environment, we do get a space from the university as what we call our hub.
Okay. And for you, do they need to have like a designated parking spot or like a charging station? What do they need to know before talking to you?
Yeah, no, great question. Not really charging, just because we're a hybrid.
Oh, sorry.
Hybrid
I just
vehicles,
assume everybody drives electric cars down.
Yeah. No, eventually, that definitely will be part of our platform. But right now, for pilots, and we're about to announce a big one with a retailer here in North America. They're basically, we're operating the vehicles. And yes, we'll need to house them. They have some expensive, hardware on top of it, so we need to protect that, and we'll garage them and so forth, and we'll take care of the operations. It's delivery as a service, if you will. And then in other areas where we're operating in China, for instance, that's a different model. We have some of our clients that are actually purchasing our technology and licensing our software, using their own hardware. So it's kind of depending on geography, but also the client.
Okay. So that actually brings up a good point, which is differences. So in the United States, there's sort of a patchwork of regulations as different municipalities come up with their own rules and regulations around it, right? Like Robomart in Boston with Stop and Shop was like, hey, we're going to do this pilot. And then the city was like, whoa, hold on. Yeah, but let's put the brakes on a little bit, right? Like literally. So what are the concerns you're hearing from the bodies that you work with, right? So working with a private campus is probably different than working with a city. But what are the concerns that you're hearing from regulators, and how can that be extrapolated out into sort of common issues rule makers want you to deal with as you come to market?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that, is very top of mind for Starship. For us, we solve the issue of congestion and pollution, and we're inherently safe. We're talking about a 50-pound robot traveling at 4 miles an hour, and if you do the math on that, that's not a lot of joules of energy, right? So we've already been approved statewide in 7 states, a number of countries, a number of cities. We take the approach of proactively engaging. I run an entire global public affairs team with those governments because we want sensible regulation, because we have put in the time to be safe, and we want to make sure that anyone else who's following us into our space also provides that same level of safety.
Is there anything in particular? So you mentioned, they move slowly. Do you need to have a certain number of sensors? Do you need to have a type of sensor? And without belying your trade secrets or anything like that, but just are there common threads that you're finding they want built into your robots to make sure they are safe?
I think the legislators are coming up to speed in general on the technology. We can easily demonstrate. We've driven over 200,000 miles as a fleet, so our safety record is clear. The interesting part will be differentiating the Starship technology with other entrants who might come into the space later. One thing, though, that is interesting for us is we use sidewalks. Unlike things like dockless scooters, etc., when our robots only use the sidewalks when they're on a delivery or on the way back, and then we provide them a privately arranged space to wait for their next assignment. So we don't have the issue of just littering sidewalks, which is a major issue for cities across the United States and the world today.
I mean, I guess you're just, self-driving cars are sort of a big topic nationwide, so you're just there's nothing in particular, or are you hearing anything?
No, nothing in particular. I mean, there's regulators and what we've experienced, and I run this at the company, but there's a big willingness to work together with the companies, and I think the industry is so new that regulators are trying to figure things out, and leaning on companies, and companies are also leaning on the regulators. So there's a lot of nice interplay happening. We're seeing this at sort of the city level, state level, but also at the national level as well. Organizations like PAVE that have come together, and now the World Economic Forum, trying to effectively set these global standards for autonomous driving. So that impacts us, and we're speaking with all those folks, and really want to make help us set develop and set the standards for functional safety.
Okay, we only have a couple minutes left, and I will try to open it up to questions here real quick. I see you. Just one. So what's interesting about AutoX is that you're a delivery vehicle, but also a mini mart. So if you didn't know this, the back seat has a bunch of vegetables and other kinds of things in it. So that sort of eliminates or reduces the amount of dead time of the vehicle, right? So how much of it do you have the vehicle just kind of driving around a little bit to act as a mini mart, or is it really doing point and back, point and back, point and back? And if the consumer just happens to want to buy a Twinkie, well, they can reach in and grab it.
Yeah, it's very much the latter.
Okay.
So it's more of like an added service that
Okay.
the company that the consumers can get.
Have you guys explored anything in Starship in terms of the return trip? Because you're coming back, you're delivering, and then you're coming back empty. Is there anything like Brothers?
No, we're not necessarily coming
okay.
back. So, for instance, Northern Arizona University, our most recent launch, which is going gangbusters. They have a North Campus and a South Campus, and each one has, about 7 or 8 restaurants each. So if I take wings from the coop up north, I'm not going to bring it back to the coop for more wings. I'm going to stop at the wedge and I'm going to pick up a pizza. So we can solve that with system utilization.
Okay, so it's not going there and back, there and back. It's actually routing around.
Right. Yeah, we have internal fleet management software that says, that robot, which is over there, is best suited for this next delivery. And it's not dedicated to one particular. We focus on an operating environment with multiple suppliers.
Okay, no, we had a question. I know Cynthia raised her hand. And
Hi. So I know we're still pretty early in the delivery space, but one of the things that you can imagine once it becomes a lot more prevalent, and the average robot now sees other robots on the street instead of just human beings. How have you guys thought through? Is there a need for an industry standard so that a robot from, say, Marble and a robot from Starship, they meet each other, they don't just freeze because each is waiting for the other to move first? Similarly with cars, again, there's a dozen, there's new ones every single day. How do you make sure that different technologies from different companies can communicate with each other? Because I think right now a lot of the development is more conservative, for safety reasons, because you don't ever want to bump into somebody. But how do you think about it from a robot-to-robot interaction perspective?
So our robots are smart enough, frankly, to deal with anything that they encounter, whether it's a car, a motorcycle, a motorbike, a person in a wheelchair, a person using a disability cane. If somebody else's robot is so big it takes up the whole sidewalk, that's a problem. And we'll have to cross that bridge when we come to it, but we haven't really seen that size robot make it into commercial deployment yet. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so our robots were never intended to be 100% autonomous. So we have 2 remote operation centers, or remote monitoring centers, one in Europe and one in Washington, D.C. So when the robot gets into a highly abnormal or complex or challenging situation, it's programmed to ask for help. So you can imagine a handful of people overseeing, well over 100 robots across the world in this, what I like to call NASA-looking room, and all of a sudden E214 will start flashing, and then a human will be able to intervene and add some extra judgment to that situation. Does that answer your question better? Thank you.
I think that's called the Canadian problem, right? Robots are too polite to each other. I think we had one question.
Yes, and this has got to be the last one.
Last one.
Tragically. Here we go.
Hi. Great information. Curious about abuse scenarios and when people have been upset with the robots for both of your products. In what cases have you guys seen abuse or people get really pissed off, and kind of have you seen any patterns emerge from that?
I get asked that question all the time. The only question that I guess more oftenly is, has it ever been stolen? The answer is nobody's tried to steal it yet, and it's amazing. Really, people love these robots. We've encountered over 15 million people around the world, and we've not encountered this ill intent kind of situation. If anything, if people feel the robot, if they perceive it needs help, if anything, they'll try to contact the robot to think, oh, it needs redirection or something like that, when usually it doesn't. It's just their perception of it. So I think the design of the form factor is intentionally non-threatening. It's intentionally cute. And usually we do a good job of educating the environments where we operate that these are providing a community service, whether it be for students or the less abled. And if we have more time, I could tell some stories about that.
So pin him after our talk. Thank you so much for being here, Hugo and Ryan. Big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right.